number 8 of 10. Risk. Once you've got your plan drawn out, usually as a Gantt chart, the next step is to think what could go wrong. Now, some people don't like to think about that. They go, oh, it'll be fine, let's just do it. But actually, it is a good idea to think about what must go wrong. And good project managers are usually pessimists, because they're usually thinking, well, I'm worried about that, and I'm worried about that. And what you want is somebody who's thought of every possible problem, because they're such a pessimist. In fact, the ideal project manager would probably have 3 personal qualities. They'd probably have verging on OCD, attention to detail. They'd be a pessimist. They'd also be quite assertive, as we said earlier. So that's what you want. You want an assertive, miserable, OCD pessimist. Does anybody think they fit that profile? Funnily enough, I'm thinking Gordon Brown. And I think when he went for Prime Minister, he went for the wrong PM. He should have been a project manager. I think he would have been great. Because attention to detail, you know, quite pessimistic, quite assertive, hopefully. Well, he would have been good. But anyway, so you want somebody who's going to think, oh, I'm really worried about the risk of that. And all you do is you just think, what could go wrong? And then you think, how likely is it to go wrong? And how serious would it be if it went wrong? So if you take, for example, barbecue, what could possibly go wrong with the barbecue that we're all going to have? Could catch fire, yes, people could be burnt. It may not light, yeah. Could run out of gas. What else? Food poisoning. I'm getting really depressed about this barbecue now. But you have to go through this. Say, everybody's vegetarian or whatever, yeah. Could rain. We haven't had that. So you just get a great big list of all the things that could go wrong. And then you need to have a plan for each of those. And you can imagine what the plans will be for most of those things. Like vegetarian, you probably find out in advance how many vegetarians you've got, have a veggie option, etc. So it will be okay once you'd identified all the risks, but you want to get the list of everything, don't you? Probably brainstorm with team again. Now, nobody mentioned attacked by a swarm of killer bees just now. Do you think that would be serious? Yes. Yeah, I think it would be. So why didn't you mention it? It's not very likely. Yeah. And then hassled by wasps probably is quite likely, but not very serious. Although, if you're allergic to wasp stings, of course, it's likely and serious, so you need a plan. So what you do is you do this big list, and you just assess them for how likely, how serious. And if it's reasonably both, then you need to have a plan. Okay? But if it's very unlikely or not serious, you haven't got to worry about it. So you filter them out. And your plan involves either making it less likely or less serious. So something like, for example, food poisoning, how would we make that less likely? Yeah, make sure it's properly cooked. Maybe have a chef. Stop people poking their own sausage, going, I reckon that's ready. And, you know, have it roped off, have sausage control or whatever. And how would we make it less serious if people do get food poisoning? Yeah, sign a disclaimer when you come in. I don't know about you, I'd worry if I turned up at a barbecue and had to sign a disclaimer. But you could, yeah. Have insurance. Have it on a Friday so they can be sick all weekend and it won't affect work. If it was a work barbecue. You could have lots of toilets, buckets at least, stomach pumps, etc. So, but I think you'll agree that making it less likely is more desirable than making it less serious. And, you know, and it's the same with, for example, fire in this building. Hopefully they've made it less likely. How do you make fire less likely, by the way? You have rules, don't you? Well, first of all, you check the electrics regularly and things like that. Do you remember last time we were here, we were doing this in the dark, by the way? And it wasn't we hadn't switched the lights on. The lights didn't work. But anyway, luckily they're working tonight. But so you check the electrics, and you have various rules, don't you? Like you're not allowed to store buckets of petrol underneath your desk and things like that. And there are all sorts of rules, which you probably aren't aware of, but you would be made aware of if you tried to store petrol under your desk. And then how do we make fire less serious? What do we do to stop people dying if there's a fire? Fire escapes, sprinklers, yeah, extinguishers, fire practices, we do all that. And we hope we'll never need that. So that's what we do. And so with every type of risk, you can usually do one or the other. With rain, it's quite difficult to make it less likely. You could have the barbecue in Portugal, say, but apart from that, it's quite difficult to make it less likely. But you can make it less serious by having a gazebo to shelter under, or having it next door to a pub or something like that. So that's what you do with risk analysis. Great big list. Do we need to worry about them? And if we do, can we make them less likely and less serious? And that's all you do with risk. Not a lot to say about step 8, although you do need to do it, really, I think. Tip number 9. Suppose halfway through, your project is under budget. Is that good? Yes, you might have missed something. What does it probably mean? You could have overestimated your costs. Your quality might not be very good. Oh, what's the third thing? Yeah, it could be that. Your costs, yeah. But I was just thinking cost and quality. So what could be happening? We could just be late, couldn't we? We just might not have done it yet. We might be running late. And what would cause that? And the answer is loads of things, like somebody's been off sick, or you had fewer people than you expected. The really important thing to remember, under budget means late, almost certainly. This is a real-life example, actually, from a local council quite near here. But don't worry, it's not Poole and it's not Bournemouth, for people who are from there. They were planning to do this 20 million project. It's a road they were building, and 5 years. And I was talking to the guy after, I think 1 year had gone. And he said, everything's fine. We've spent 4 million quid on it, so everything's fine. Now, what do you think? Is this project fine? £20 million over 5 years. 1 year's gone. We've spent 4 million. What do you reckon? Yeah, but leaving aside inflation. Pardon? Yes, and as you were saying earlier on, it could well be that all the expensive stuff is going to be at the end. So we need to know the spend profile, don't we? There's something else, though. There's something else I want to know. Let's suppose the spend profile really is £4 million a year. What was the other thing that could be going wrong?
Are they on time?
Yeah, they might not have done a year's worth. They might have only done 10%. So it could well be that that they've done 10% and it's going to end up costing them 40 million instead of 20. So we need to know how much progress has been made, and we need to know what the spend profile is. So how can I find out how much progress has been made? What's an easy way to get a view of that? Gantt chart. Yeah. And what about the spend profile? How can I find out whether they're going to spend most of the money at the beginning or the middle or the end? Gantt chart. Because the Gantt chart will tell us what we're doing when, won't it? And we can just look and see where the expensive tasks are. And I showed you the adding up of the hours earlier on to get that profile. But you could do exactly the same with the money, couldn't you? Because if you just put what you're going to spend along each of those bars, you could add it all up and get a spend profile for the money. So the point is, Gantt chart will tell you both those things. So I said to the guy, OK, so what does the Gantt chart show? Guess what he said? Yeah. He said, oh, actually, I don't think we've got one of them. So I said, well, how do you control the project? And he said, oh, well, we have a meeting with the contractor every month. So I said, oh, right, so obviously the contractor's got a Gantt chart then. And he went, no, they haven't. Well, they may have, I don't know, but I haven't seen it. So I said, well, what do you do at that meeting? What do you talk about if you don't have a half-coloured in Gantt chart? And he said, well, good question, really. He said, basically, they tell me stories. So they say, oh, it's been a terrible month. We couldn't get the concrete to harden off, but we used a different mixture and we managed to do it, and Fred worked overtime, so, you know. And they just tell him stuff, which is all very jolly, but he actually has no picture, really, of what's happening. Now, he could drive out there and look, but if he gets there, what will he find? Loads of holes in the ground, concrete, lorries, men running around. It doesn't actually tell you anything. The Gantt chart's the only thing that actually tells you what should you have done, what have you actually done. So, no need to panic, but it is a £20 million project. It is totally out of control. But still. Taxpayers' money, yeah. It'll probably be fine. Yeah. So, yeah. So all that says really is you do need to look at the money you've spent, but you need to compare it with the Gantt chart, and then it makes sense. So that's kind of actually the fourth reason why Gantt charts are good, to make sense of the financial information that you've got. So my last of my 10 things is to always review the project afterwards. Every book will tell you you must review your project afterwards. No one ever does it. They're always too busy. Want to get on to the next one, on to the next one. And if it went well, it's like, oh, we don't need to review it. If it went badly, it's like, we don't want to review it. And if you think about it, it's human nature to not want to review things, because if it's gone well, you don't really want to give away all your secrets to other people. And if it's gone badly, you definitely don't want to confess all your problems to everybody else. So it's management's job to make people do a review, because otherwise they just won't. But of course, it's vital to do reviews, because they're the only time that we learn. And you may think, no, I learn as I go along. But do you? And maybe you do. But the problem is that 3 years' time, you'll have forgotten that project and whatever went wrong. And if you think about your organisations, the things that go wrong, what proportion have gone wrong before? It's probably 99% have happened somewhere before. And the difficulty is, even if you do learn all your lessons and remember them forever, what about everybody else? How do you learn from each other? And the only way you can do it is to have a review, write it down, and have it available to everybody. Store it somewhere centrally on some central drive where people can look at it. Maybe a searchable database. And imagine if you had everything you'd learnt from the last 10 years of projects. It would be really useful. And imagine if you never repeated a mistake. You'd have to be quite creative to keep thinking of new mistakes. There's no such thing as a new mistake. Almost certainly. And so clearly reviewing would be sensible if we could only do it. So the objective is to repeat the good things. So you should write down everything you did that was good. Even if it was just an accident, write it down anyway. Make sure you always do it from now on. And then make sure we don't obviously repeat the bad things. So we need to confess to every mistake, which means that you have to have a no-blame culture. Have you got a no-blame culture? It's almost impossible to have one, actually, because it's human nature to blame people when they make mistakes. But of course, they didn't do it deliberately, so bollocking them afterwards is pointless. And all that will happen if you have a blame culture is people will hide mistakes, and then they'll happen again. So we've got to somehow get people to confess to their mistakes. So we've got what was good and what was bad. The third question, what could we do even better next time, is a really important question as well. And it's quite different to the other two, because the first two are what actually happened. But the third one is what didn't happen, but we wish it had. So looking back with perfect hindsight, which we always have afterwards, the idea is we say, what could we have done even better? And write that down as well. So you capture it all for next time. And then this little document, which mustn't be a big, boring report nobody reads. It just must be 1 page of A4, which you store. That then feeds back into all your future projects. So when you're listing the tasks, for example, you can look through some previous projects and think, oh, that's a good idea. We'll add that task in. And when you're doing your risk analysis, you look back through the previous 100 barbecues and you think, oh, right, I hadn't thought of that one. Better make sure we look out for that. And so the risk analysis also pulls information from previous projects. So it's really important to do your reviews. Nobody ever does. But if you're a manager, make sure your people do their reviews. Say to them, have you done a review for that project? Can you copy me in when you do that review? Where do you store your reviews? Those are good questions to ask. So there we are. That's project management. We've zoomed through it in approximately slightly more than 45 minutes. Hope that's given you stuff to think about. In the book that we give out, there's notes on project management, but also I've got a mini card, which I'll give you in a minute. And the mini card has got the sort of this process that we've been going through of listing tasks, estimating, network diagram, Gantt chart, risk, colouring in the Gantt chart as you go along, monitoring the cost. So that's all listed on the little mini card as well. So any questions you want to ask about project management? We've got a few minutes. You've been asking as we've gone along, which is great as well. But do you want to ask any? Yeah, go for it.